Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're viewing this live, fantastic. If you found it later on, that's great too. My name is Cecily. I'm the program coordinator at Busboys and Poets Books. And today we have Olivia Blake, the author of the Atlas Six. Hi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Me too.
Such a cool video. I feel very hyped.
I know. I've been feeling very, very, very excited. And I love that that video really sets the tone before we start everything. All right, viewers, please remember that you can purchase a signed copy through our Eventbrite page, and the signatures will be personalized. We will reach out to you and find out what name you would like the book to be made out to. So if you already have a copy and you'd like to have one for someone else as a gift, great idea, then do so. I have my copy here. And I have a lot of questions for you today, Olivia, but I will make time for questions at the end. So everyone, please chat with us. Put your questions, your comments in the comment box, and we'll take a look at them later. All right. So let's dive into it. I've already got so much to say. So when I was reading this book, I noticed that there is a lot of very scientifically specific language. And when you speak in a lot of scientific terms, it can be easy to lose the reader, but you do a very good job at like guiding us along so that we don't get too lost, which is very fun. I felt like I was learning and reading. um, I was curious.
Teachers, I've educated you.
Yes, exactly. Educated and entertained. I'm curious if this was knowledge that you had before, or if there was a lot of research that went into gaining that vocabulary.
So I'm not a sciencey person per se. My husband is a physics teacher. He teaches high school physics and AP physics.
Oh, cool.
And so I think we had just reached a point in our relationship where, you start to infect each other. I had done a lot of I had been writing a lot of paranormal type fantasy where the magic was more of a supernatural type. And then I kind of had this idea. It was actually when I was writing a different book. When I wrote Alone with You in the Ether, which is another one of my books. I had this idea about time travel. It had to do with hexagons. I really went down this whole rabbit hole with research and invented this time travel theory. And then as I was researching my time travel idea, I started running into a lot more of the quantum theory, the theories in quantum physics about time. Read some books about time that my husband happened to have. And I was like, he saw me reading one and was like, oh, you have to read these also. Which is funny because he's more into the mechanics of physics, and my interest was the theory. And the earliest physicists were really into naturalism and the way that it's this essential way of looking at the universe. How is the universe made? It coincided with what was interesting to me, which was, mythology and classics. So all of which is to say, I did not know anything until I kind of worked my way backwards as I was researching. As I had made up this time travel theory in my head, I was like, how can I make it sound more real?
Yeah.
As I was doing the research to make it sound real, I sort of came up with this separate idea that was like, what if this was the way that magic worked? What if this totally unproven physics was real and I just called it magic? So in that sense, it should be easy enough to understand because I am an idiot. We're not coming into this book from a place of expertise.
I'm not a doctor in physics.
So it's meant to be approachable. I wanted it to be real to people who knew what I would like, who actually work with physics and who are actual scientists. I wanted it to feel real to them, but also interesting to people who had no idea about the science, which is a really fine line.
Yeah. You kind of answered my next question because I was going to say, magic is often portrayed very fantastically, but there's still definitely an element of wonder to the magic here, but it feels so grounded and so real, not even only in the way that you describe it, but even when we talk about how the capitalistic uses of magic in this book, which I found so interesting. When I read it, I thought that is so realistic.
Yeah.
If we had magic, capitalism would definitely find a way to make use of it. So I know you said that you put a lot of research and it started with a different story and then kind of spiraled into this one. How long did it take to kind of set up the rules for your magic system? Did you have, like, I imagine you must have had some hard and fast rules.
I mean, there's basically one rule, and I constantly refer to it as like the sweat of the magic system.
Mhm.
I just basically wanted it to be, you can't just conjure something from nothing, which is
Mhm.
technically a law of physics. So science, I know what I'm talking about. At one point I was telling my husband, I was like, someday people are going to catch on to to how little I actually understand. And he was like, you get that, you get the fundamental rule, which is that you don't make something from nothing and nothing can completely disappear. And so I just kind of felt like that's the one rule, basically. So all the characters, they had their different variations on what their magic can do, but they all have limits. And to me, that like,
Right.
as long as you can see and feel the limits, that's what makes it a little bit more concrete. Because I think in the book I talk about how the way that the magical specialties work is that like you have your one thing that you're best at, in the same way that like all athletes have a sport that they're the best at. You could technically pick up another sport, but would you be really great at it? Not
Yeah.
really. So
Yeah.
like for me, that having that sort of basic rule that's like, yeah, you have your gifts like anyone does, and you use them like anyone does, and but also the more that you refine them, the better you are at them. So
Yeah.
there's a sort of understanding of how you become great. And I also wanted that to feed into the naturally competitive environment of academia. Just like, yeah, there are
Mm.
some people who are naturally smarter than others, but you also, like, when you get in the weeds of it, you see who's really the best. And
Mm.
then yeah, it was just fun to me. I'm getting off on a separate train of thought here, but
No, I love it.
I mean, the part that was fun to me was taking these elements of academia and things that we sort of, innately understand from our participation in those structures, and
Mhm.
then just turning them up really high with
Yeah.
these people who are really good at what they do. But yeah, the capitalist stuff. Um, I have talked before about how when I was writing this book, I was writing it from a place of, would it be ethical for me to have a child? I already know the world sucks. I know that we've only got like so many years left until like the polar ice caps melt, and then like everything, all economies collapse, etc. Like it felt genuinely irresponsible to be having a child. And then I had one,
Yeah.
so that probably says a lot.
You came through in the end.
Well, my husband talked me into it. And actually, his whole argument came from a place of preservation of the species.
That is very much a scientist
I
right
mean,
there.
we truly, we sat down and I was like, listen, I don't think it's ethical to have a baby. And he goes, preservation of the species. And I was like, overpopulation? And he goes, one child. And then back and forth like that.
That is
Um,
fantastic.
so ultimately, yes, I had one, but I was coming from this very conflicted place of like, this child, I can't guarantee that. Look, I can't guarantee reproductive rights. I can't guarantee
Mhm.
you won't get shot in school. Like all of this was just so. All of this was pressing on my brain,
Yeah.
and I kind of wanted to pivot and talk about it, but not really. Sort of like, yeah, let's exist in this world where these problems have continued. And there's an irony to that. That's like,
Yeah.
okay, so now we have magic. There was one. I've done like a million Q&As at this point, and there was one Q&A that was like, do you think that magic would help the world, or would it make things worse? Which was a great question, and I was like, well, look at CRISPR and mRNA and the COVID vaccine. That's basically magic. That's crazy. And how many people actually trust it? How many people are actively chipping away at its validity? So you tell me, would magic help the world or not? So yeah.
Yeah, there are little magics everywhere. I feel like that sounds like it's the title of something, I think. But there are little magical things that are happening everywhere all over the world. And do we use them? Do we trust them? I don't know.
Do we? Does anyone unanimously agree that these things are good or bad?
Exactly. That is a really, really good answer to that question.
Yeah.
It kind of leads into a question that I had about, so with fantasy and sci-fi, a lot of the time there's a lot of world building because it's set in a entirely different world. So this is set in our world, but different.
Yes.
Our world with some tweaks. So what was that process like of there's still world building involved, of building a world parallel to ours, building a world that all of the extra little things and making it fit into the world that we already know. How was that?
So I kept world building intentionally quite minimal in the
Mhm.
first book. I really, really wanted the book to feel very claustrophobic. That like the world is just this house and the people in it. So I think there's a lot of people who walk away with questions about how the world works, and that is intentional. My hope is that you're not totally clear on how things.
Yeah, no, I'm ready to find out in the next
Yeah.
one.
I actually designed. I knew going in that I wanted it to be a trilogy, and I
Mhm.
designed the scope of the world building sort of like Westworld, where like
Oh, that's good.
season one, you're only in Westworld, you have no
Yeah.
idea what's outside it, and then as you slowly zoom out, it changes the ethics of what you're
Mhm.
looking because I wanted that very simplified moral conflict of just like, should we kill someone? But then, but then you zoom out, and that conflict is suddenly like even worse. Like it shouldn't have been like it becomes complex in the moment, but it shouldn't have been
Yeah.
right. So yeah. So anyway, all of which is to say that there is more that's getting revealed in book two, and even more in book three. Um, but so I just kind of had to answer some fundamental questions for myself about how things work.
Mhm.
So one of the things that we understand is the way that I used healthcare.
Mhm.
So like when Libby is talking about the alternatives for her sister, or speculating about them. I knew that I wanted us to exist in a world where people know about magic, and that it's built into the economy at this point. It is the reason that we've been able to survive the worst effects of climate change.
Mhm.
Initially, when I wrote this book, actually, the self-published version of this book was going to be near future. It was supposed to
Mhm.
like sort of jump scare that actually were in like 2060. But the traditionally published version, they were like, maybe don't do that. And I was like, you know what?
Okay.
So rather than being near future, this is a parallel world.
Yeah.
So that's like that was one of those questions. And so when answering for myself, who has access to magic? It seemed very easy to say the people who can afford it, and that felt like it fit very easily into the world we already have.
Yeah.
So kind of this sort of implication that at some point people didn't know about magic or didn't have access to it, and now they theoretically do. But there
Mhm.
are copyrights. There's like government statutes about how much magic can be used. I mentioned this when I was talking about Callum Nova's family, that they're
Mhm.
constantly like overstepping how much magic they're allowed to put and stuff
What a family.
to mortals. Yeah. So that's just something like that was just something that felt really real. I just keep coming back to that. But we have this family that got rich off of selling. They're definitely taking advantage of tax loopholes, and they're doing things to make their product more competitive that are probably quite sketchy. So
Which is just
what? All this feels right.
yeah, it's when I read it, I was like, "This is just it's what would happen, isn't it? This is exactly what it would be like." And it
Yeah.
felt, like I said before, very grounded, not just how the magic worked, but how it was used.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, like you mentioned, who has access to magic, and then even, a more secret, smaller section of that is who has access to knowledge,
Yes.
which I found very interesting. And it's the elite within the elite almost.
Yeah.
Um, how did you, so I'm curious if the story came first or the characters, because it's very, very character focused, but there's still a strong plot. So which came first? Did you find your characters? Because I know you mentioned you had this interest in the time travel and this kind of magic and stuff like that before. Um, After that point, was there the character or the plot?
Definitely characters first.
Mm,
The only thing that I knew going in was that I wanted to have this mix of characters. I
yeah.
wanted this mix of magical abilities, and I wanted the particular kinds of magic to have an effect on what they were like as people.
Mhm.
And then I was like, but they need something, like in academia, the stakes are you have to get the highest grade. So, what is the equivalent of that here? Because I also wanted it. I wanted them to be graduate students.
Mhm.
I wanted us to be dealing like definitely with adults, um,
Yeah.
and yeah, because I think that part of sometimes I can't buy into academic minded stories because it's unclear to me what the end goal is. And
Mm.
so with that in mind, I was like, well, what would be really compelling stakes? You know? So I went in with, all right, here's 6 people and here's one major problem.
Mm.
But yeah, the way that I write, I don't typically know a lot about what's going to happen. I call myself a reformed pantser all the time because I used to be 100% a pantser, no idea what was going on. Now I like sort of outline. So like the entire parts 1 and 2 of the Atlas 6 were written without any, notes or research. It's just like here, let's just take a step in, see what things look like, and then let's pause and see where we're going from here.
Yeah.
So yeah, so definitely characters first, and that's why we get that sort of like cinematic intro of everybody being introduced.
Everyone,
It's
yeah, it's
a little Ocean's 11.
yeah, the characters, they're very, very strong. And I really felt like I I felt each of their point of view. I'd be so much on one character's side, and then we'd see the other character, and I was like, but you make some good points though. And I loved that. I loved being conflicted. I loved feeling like, okay, no one's a villain here, even if they might have been a villain in somebody else's story. They're
Yes.
not a villain in this story, which was a nice way to view it. Um, and one thing I do find interesting, you mentioned it being claustrophobic and putting all these characters in this space. And I know, I think as a society that's interested in dark academia and will watch anything that has to do with it or think of it in such an idealist, romanticized way. And I really loved actually the realisticness of these characters kind of being like, I want to go home. I'm tired of the same building all the time. And that's true. I think we can really look at these things sometimes and be like, I would love to be locked away in a Victorian old building. But it felt a little bit more like we're modern people. We don't want to do that all the time. So that was fun. That was
I
exciting.
definitely did want to acknowledge the ridiculous.
I definitely felt like there was an awareness of it, the characters pointing out like, seriously? That's all
Yeah.
I'm gonna I loved that. Like, we know where we are. We understand how almost how crazy it can kind of be. And what was it that you said earlier? I lost my train of thought for a second, but there was a point that you made I wanted to get back to. Hopefully I remember it and we'll get back there. But
That's fine.
with the with the strength of it. I know.
I got
It's the
pregnant.
worst. I mean, it's the worst. I'm like, oh, where did that question go? It'll come back eventually.
Back to us. Or it wasn't meant to be.
um, with the strength of your characters and the ensemble and finding the voices for each of them, what was your process of character creation? How did you make them so strong? Like, oh, there we go. Now I remember what the question was. You mentioned how the magic that they have influences their personality, and you can definitely see that. How did you How did you sit down, write these characters, decide, okay, this is what that magic is going to do to this person, etc.?
Well, so I knew going in that I wanted to write characters who were not necessarily likable. I wanted to write
Mhm.
characters who were, you really couldn't say whether they were good or bad.
Yeah.
Um, but that conflict was what was interesting to me. Like how do you write, how do you take a person who's maybe not a good person and still make their motives, still like give them tension. And so to me that was sort of like, how, what is their fundamental irony in life, you know,
Mm.
like what pushes them forward and ultimately also holds them back. And I mean, I've always been very character first. I always talk about how I come from fandom, and basically all fan fiction is a character study, basically.
That is very true.
So, so like that's my comfortable place. Is let's look at what makes this character who they are, and how do we project their actions from there.
Yeah.
Um, and the way that I would do this was to start with one character, and Libby is our entry point for a reason.
Mhm.
She's meant to feel familiar to the audience. She's supposed to be an archetype that you've run into before,
Mhm.
um, and you know, because she's the first step. She's a starting point. I was like, let's start with this kind of person, and then who would we go to next that's gonna be pretty drastically different. And I just kind of kept doing that. It was just like, who have we just met and who would be interesting to meet next based on what we've just seen. So like from the beginning, it's just an exercise of me entertaining myself. My sort of fundamental belief in terms of character perspectives and also life is that pretty much everyone is their own unreliable narrator. There's
Mhm.
no such thing as actually understanding another person or their
Mhm.
perspective. So having this way of seeing the insides of their thoughts, but also identifying the ways that they are wrong, uh,
Mhm.
that was kind of fun. It's like this ongoing psychological exercise of just like, well, in what ways are their own biases um, making them come to incorrect conclusions about the other characters.
Yeah.
Also thought it would be fun for the audience for there not to be an omniscient voice. So there is no narrator telling you this is the actual truth, this is what actually happened. You only hear from these
Yeah.
characters. And then that way, every time you get introduced to a new point of view, you're seeing something you didn't see before, which to me is very true to life.
Yeah.
I'm always very interested in the human aspect of things. That's what I was actually, a lot of this comes from many arguments I've had with my husband because he's very into like space.
Yeah.
When I asked him, I was like, if you could study anything, you know, you got the Library of Alexandria, what would you study? He said, space. And
Grace.
he right there. But I don't think that, like, I am not interested by the idea of going to space
Mhm.
because to me, it's not interesting how we do that. It's interesting how people react to that. Like, if like what happens to humanity at that point. And so like even just there is that same conflict with the characters. They all care about something different because they're coming into it from a totally different perspective. The characters who are very physical and very grounded in things that you can physically do, they care about the mechanics. And then the other characters who maybe don't care about that or anything are just like, this is not interesting. Yeah.
I really liked that, like you said, the characters who are grounded in what they cared about, seeing that with, without giving too much away, but during lessons where certain characters are more interested in certain kind of things and conversations, it felt very, very interesting. That it wasn't, everyone has a scramble for knowledge. Everyone wants to know the same thing. It felt um, very relatable. And so from what you're saying, it makes sense because I was going to ask, why did you choose 6 points of views instead of maybe just one or two? Because even with a big ensemble, you don't always hear everyone's voice. Sometimes it's just a hero and five supporters, but everyone kind of feels like a real solid co-tagonist rather than just having one protagonist. And I enjoyed that. So is that kind of where you came with that decision to have all six, or was it just because you thought of six characters?
Yeah. Well, so originally I had written a book that was not this book. It was just
Mhm.
a completely different book, but four of the characters existed in it. And not even these characters. It's hard to explain. I had written a
Mhm.
completely other story, and then I liked the concept and just completely scrapped everything story related and kept a few of the characters, pushed one back, pushed three forward. It was a whole thing. And but I just what feels unconventional to me about this book, that I wanted to do with it, was that this story is the people. The
Yeah.
plot is them, and not just them, but the space between them. The story is kind of, the plot is living in the places between
Yeah.
their perspectives. And so, I mean, why six? I don't know. They just were six of them.
Title sounds very good too.
It just, yeah, it felt like the right number of, everybody sort of got their equal and opposite.
Mhm.
I often use Libby and Callum for that, because they're like, to me, they have the same flaws.
Yeah.
Like, they seem like they're polar opposites, but what they actually dislike about each other is their essential similarity. They even like the same person, so it's, to me, I was like, this is perfect. This is hilarious. They would hate it if they if either of them had to acknowledge that this is the person most like them, they would hate
I thought that was a good one.
it. so yeah, where did I start this train of thought? Where, yeah, see, this is what I mean. Going, but just essentially, a lot of the way this book came together, I wish I could call it purposeful or anything, but it was just that I thought it would be interesting to write these particular people, and to focus not so much on what they're doing, but how they're reacting to what's being done. Which in some ways is kind of like a sleight of hand thing. Like, I can't actually tell you how they're making a black hole, so instead let's view this from another character's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and just, you could just trust me that this is happening.
Just trust. Just the
Yeah.
suspension of disbelief is strong.
Yeah, and what's interesting in that moment is not the science experiment that's being done, but should it be happening, which is
Yeah.
sort of the fundamental question of the whole series, is what should we do
Yeah.
with this?
And I think what's very smart about viewing these things or how they're reacting to it is it kind of lets the audience react to the readers. Or like, we don't focus on how it's done. We're focusing on, oh my gosh, how are we feeling about it?
Yeah.
And in terms of being, just writing what you found interesting, it works. It definitely worked here. I'm curious, how long did this take to write?
So the first draft took 8 weeks. I remember that. But it was, like I said, it was some of these were characters that I had adapted from a manuscript I had
Mhm.
written like 2 years prior. So I think that it was the summer of 2019 when I decided I was going to revisit that story and kind of scrap it and put it back together. And so sometime in the summer, I decided what the stakes were going to be, and it marinated for a while. And then I wrote it in the winter of 2019. This is one that didn't require a lot. I'm a very big, I don't pre-write, but I revise a lot. I have like a 4-draft revision process. My first draft doesn't necessarily look like the end result. But this one didn't have that many edits. I had like one additional scene that had to be written, and then obviously stylistic changes and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then when we went through the edits with Tor, again, a little bit of structural change. But it came together very naturally, I think, because I was already interested in these characters. And yeah, it's just I think because when I was asking myself, is this unethical choice to
Yeah.
force a life into existence. Every time he's like really upset, I just think about the thing from The Good Place. And he's like, birth is a curse and existence is a prison. Like, yeah, I did this to you. I'm so sorry.
I think of that sentence all the time too.
I think about it all the time.
All the time.
And so, this series is my answer to, if birth is a curse and existence is a prison and we have to exist anyway, what actually matters?
Yeah.
And so that's just a question that I pose over and over from 6 different points of view.
And so book 2, we're expecting it soon. Did that also kind of come along easily afterwards, or was it more of a struggle? How did that one go?
I was so afraid of book 2. Well, so this was such a weird time, So book 1 was self-published in 2020, January 2020, and then the world went nuts. Continues to be nuts,
Yeah.
but sort of an acute pain at the time.
Hmm.
I queried and then sold a young adult romance, and so I thought I had intended to write the Atlas series as a self-published series, and I was going to do a book a year. And then when they didn't set my young adult book until 2022, I was like, I don't think I'm supposed to I don't think I'm supposed to work on a book that's not, so
Yeah.
so maybe I have to come out with a young adult book first, and then I'll finish the series. And so I'm just not going to worry about it right now. So I started writing it, got not very far in, put it aside, had the baby, and then all of a sudden the book takes off, and I don't understand what's happening. We're revising book 1, and then they're like, by the way, also, just so you know, the supply chain is crazy, and you have 5 minutes to produce a book. And there were I'm lightly paraphrasing.
Yeah. You have 5 minutes. Good luck.
Yeah, ready and pencils down. So the second book, I have the arc here. I'm also so I'm writing book 3 right now. So I have my dictionary of philosophy with me, which I happen to own. So that's fun fact about me. So I have this arc here. Nobody asked me for it. I don't have very many.
All right, I'll scratch that from my to-do list.
No, I just did a giveaway, and it was so hard. I had to pick a random winner, and there were so many,
Wow.
2,000 comments or something, and it's just, yeah, I wish I had a lot more of these. But anyway, so I wrote this first draft in 4 weeks because I had to, because my baby would only sleep on me, and so I had to have my mother come and live with me, which you want to move expeditiously when there's someone else living in your house. So I think because I didn't have much time, it was easy. If you just remove the voice that tells you, uh-oh, what if you just ruined everything? What if you're a hack? You tell that voice shh,
I don't have time for you.
We really don't have time for this. We just do not have time for this conversation. It really makes things easier. I really recommend it to anyone who's an aspiring novelist. Definitely just tell that voice you don't have time, and things will go a lot faster. And I'm having the same experience now in writing book 3 that I sort of vaguely remember being like, uh-oh, we just did that. Do we want to stop and reconsider? Nope. Okay. So definitely a lot of, but like I said, I revise a lot, really sort of heavy. My first revision round is quite heavy. It takes me probably double the length of time it takes to write the first draft, but it feels like a different kind of energy. Drafting is very sort of cerebral, high level imagination. I have to focus. You can't interrupt me. Versus revision is this is just sweat. This is just nose to the grindstone. Yeah. It just has to be clean and make sense. So,
all right.
I don't know where that question started, but there's your answer.
It started in exactly where you ended it, and how it was easy and how did it go. And I think that's great advice. I'm definitely going to apply that to everything I do. Like, just tell the voice, I don't have time.
Yeah.
I still have lots of questions for you. However, there are many, many questions in the
Oh,
comments section.
okay.
So I'm not going to hog you all to myself.
Okay.
So I'm gonna just show them on screen. So first we have Katie Zimmer,
Oh,
who
hi,
says, "Hey Olivia, babe, what is the new release you are the most excited to read this year?"
Katie. That's so hard. There's so many books I want to read. I want to read the new Otessa Moshfegh book. What else is on my? I really want to read. My only flex is that I asked my editor for a copy of the second book in the All of Us Villains duology, so All of Our Demise. I asked for that early. What else do I have that's early? I have the Luminaries by Susan Dennard. I'm really excited about
Ooh.
that. I know there's more. As soon as we end this, like 1,000 things are gonna jump into my head. There's a lot of things that I have gotten to read already. So I feel sort of in a weird position in time where I can't remember what's already come out and what hasn't yet, that I'm just an ordinary person for. Yeah, I don't know. My brain is like so clouded with things. You know what? This is fine. I'm going to waste a little bit of everybody's time.
Go. I'm gonna look for the next question or comments while you do that.
Okay, sounds good. Oh, right now I'm reading The Dawn of Everything, which I think some people have been talking about. It's a new history of humanity, and it's very, very interesting. It's nonfiction.
Yeah, it's hard to keep, like, as a person working in a bookstore, it's also hard to keep up sometimes with like every book that I've read. So I definitely get where you're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes just came out by Cat Sebastian. I friggin' love Cat Sebastian. I said once that I would follow her over a cliff, and it's true. I also have The Final Strike to read, the first binding. Oh my God. The best thing about being a novelist is writing books. The second best thing is reading books.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing about working in a bookstore is reading books and getting to speak to authors.
The list is promoting books. Unless it's stuff like this.
This is fun. Okay, I've got another one from Tori Brooks. Hi, Olivia. I adored TA6 and love your writing. I'm so excited to make my way through your backlist. For those who love TA6, or I think this is a question to the fans as well. Which of your other works would you recommend fans start with for those who started with TA6? Yeah.
It depends what you like about the Atlas 6. If you like the actual writing, then and like the concept of time, then Alone with You in the Ether. Alone with You in the Ether is, well, it's being republished by Tor. Actually, a lot of my stuff is being republished by
Which
Tor.
is fantastic. I'm waiting for that republish. I'm really excited to read that one.
Yeah. So some of this you're not going to get for a while. Sidebar. Okay, I got an email today about the re-releases, specifically the re-release of One for My Enemy, and I'm just very, very excited. I initially thought we were going to get one thing and we're going to get another thing, and it's amazing. Was it? Okay, so Alone with You in the Ether is very tonally similar to the Atlas 6. But if what you like about it is the ensemble cast, then probably Masters of Death or One for My Enemy is more similar. One for My Enemy is a Shakespearean retelling. It's Romeo and Juliet plus Slavic folklore. And Masters of Death is more of a comedy. If you like Good Omens, it's more that sort of tone.
I love Good Omens. That is a good story.
Yeah, I'm not claiming that it's as good as Good Omens. It's just that vibe. The absurd is heavily present.
So we have a question from, I hope I'm saying this right, Divya. Divya Matthews, would you ever consider writing full origin stories for your Atlas 6 characters? Parisa has such an interesting background. I would be interested to see a short story or a full book.
I'm writing a trilogy, and you've only read book 1. So, you know, this is one of those things that like purposely you haven't seen a lot of certain characters. You know, there's a reason from that same sleight of hand point of view that you see a lot of some characters and not much of others because you know, there's still a long way to go. So would I consider this? It depends. Talk to me after book 3. Maybe you'll get all the answers you wanted to get. Certainly there are things that purposely you will not see until book 3. I actually specifically have just we just get a window into Paris's past that is pretty significant. So it's coming. If you haven't read it yet, well, you haven't read it yet. But after you've read book 2 and you still haven't read it, it might still be coming. It's very paced and measured.
All right, let's see. We have, Tori Brooks has another question. What inspired you to make Acadian? Is there more exploration of this in book 2? As a Nova Scotian, it was so fun to see a character who was also Nova Scotian. Thank you for that.
I was gonna say, I was like, I'm pretty sure Tori Brooks is from Nova Scotia. There's no real reason. There's this song, I really love the song like Farewell Nova Scotia or something. I was listening to it a lot and I knew I wanted a character. I didn't want all the characters to be American.
That worked very well, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just like, well, what's somewhere that's fairly remote, where a person who's not necessarily human might end up? And Nova Scotia came to mind. So I don't know if that's a good answer. Yeah. But exploration of his, I mean, I don't think I know enough about Nova Scotia. My apologies. I will come visit you. Sure. I will get on the plane now. And we'll have some background info for book 3.
Yeah, I really loved that they weren't all from America. I'm not South African originally, but I lived there. So even just seeing a South African character, I was like, oh, look at that. That's fun. It's very fun.
It felt, I've been starting to get the question, like, why did you make this character from this part of the world? And I don't have great answers for that. Yeah. I just knew they're not all American. They're not all British. Certainly some of them are. It would be unrealistic if they weren't because academia. But where would the others be from?
Yeah.
And yeah, there used to be a much more mean-spirited line in the book that I took out because it was mean, where where Nico, when Tristan and Callum are being introduced, Nico thinks it's hilarious that there's a Black Englishman, a white African, and he's like, I really hope that Rhodes mixes them up. So that line used to be in the book. And I took
that is funny. And I can understand where that would come from, especially with South Africa. It happens a lot. All right. So we have Sholing He says, hi, Olivia. I love your work. Are there any moments during your writing process when you were writing the Atlas 6 that surprised you?
Yes, very many. Because I don't outline in advance, a lot of things are surprises to me. I always point to the Parisa Callum little showdown scene. That scene I just wrote a while ago. Had no idea where we were going with it. Everything that came out of that scene was a surprise to me. So
that scene shook me. It was good.
I definitely, after I wrote it, sat there and was just like, do I want to think about anything I just did? Like, do I need to reconsider anything that just happened? And I was like, no, okay. There's something, there's a similar thing in book 2 where after I wrote it, I was like, oh no. Oh.
There's a great thing with ensembles of, you kind of want to see the characters paired against each other a little bit, even if they're working together, because you're just curious, how would this power work against this power? So that was a very, very interesting.
I like to say that this book, this series it's both a family drama and a 6-person love story.
I like that. That's a good description.
Yeah, and the whole alliance is shifting. The sequel is the ingredients have changed.
Yeah.
And, so that was really interesting to me. I'm really looking for it. It's like so annoying that you guys haven't read it yet.
I know, trust me. I also would love to have read it already.
Like driving me crazy. But I love that people are like, finally, when it's like just a few months away, like the books are being released in the same year. But like, I feel you. Yeah. It's insane that you guys haven't read it yet.
All right, we have Read with Bree asks, is there going to be a show? And I believe there is.
Yes.
Can you tell us anything about it, or is it still very under wraps?
No, I mean, I don't think there's anything I'm supposed to say yet. There's nothing like public yet. So
Yeah. Well, I'm excited
unless
for
there's
it.
going to be a show, no, I've got nothing for you.
So Abigail Han asked, hey, Olivia, I adore your writing in such an overwhelming manner. And I was wondering, which character do you see yourself in the most? And who did you have the most fun crafting? That's a good one.
It's a good one. It's definitely, I prefer that to the who's your favorite character.
Yeah.
But it's a similar answer, but it's still an important distinction because I am in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think just as another craft thing, like how could I not be in these characters? I have to reason them out of corners all the time.
Yeah.
That comes from me. Who do I see myself in most? It really just, it depends on the day. I would usually, you know, I write because it's fun. I especially wrote this book because I wanted to write something I wanted to write. And so if I sat down and didn't know where the plot was going, it was just kind of like, well, who do I want to be right now? Whose head do I want to exist in? So there were certainly times when being Parisa or Callum was more satisfying. I always come back to, I met someone when I was on tour in the UK in, where was this event? Manchester. And they were like, well, so I understand Callum perfectly. I don't think anything is wrong with Callum because I worked in retail. And I love that. Like, I understand him completely because I work in retail.
Working in retail changes you.
Yeah, it really rewrites your code. There's definitely moments when it's just like, God, humanity is garbage. Now's a good time to write Callum. And then there were other times when it made a lot more sense to write someone who was questioning things a lot more and maybe a little bit more earnest and full of hope and also full of doubt. And those were the Libby days. But yeah, I think for me, what's fun is to show a different side than what we've seen. And I kind of do that in a lot of small ways. I was thinking about that actually with, of course, I can't remember now. Just the little ways that someone can be wrong, you know. And I think I think it's important if you think of fiction as like a tool of empathy and understanding other people's perspectives, even those little moments where you have the best of intentions, but you're not really capable of stepping outside your own perspective. It's fun to actually be able to do that.
All right, let's see the next one. We have Read with Bree has another question. While the Atlas 6 isn't a romance, do you think that readers that have ships might feel fulfilled at the end of the series?
My goal is for you to walk away from this series satisfied. What that actually means is, I don't know. This is not a happily ever after book. Like, we're not ending with marriage and babies here. But certainly my goal is for people to walk away and feel, you know, like they've had a good meal.
I love
That's the best way I can put it, that you walk away from the dinner table satisfied.
I love that. All right, we have Lask WC, I think. Hey there, if you can say it, what is the side or aspect of book 2 that you are excited for the readers to experience? No, you can't say too much, but in terms of what you can.
I'm just so excited about, there's a lot in this book that I'm excited about and nervous about. Initially, I was really excited. Now, as we're getting close to it, I'm growing increasingly terrified. There's one part in this book that's just like very honest that I'm hoping you guys don't see. Don't perceive me. And then, but there's also a lot more. You know, okay, so I came into this book being like, book two is going to be hard because book two always sucks. Like book two in a trilogy is just like holding things up, and like no one's favorite book is book two, you know, when there's three. So I just kind of try to take the pressure off and try to make it like, okay, let's just make this book like enjoyable to read. Let's make this reading experience enjoyable. And so there is a more humor to me. There's a little bit more like, yeah, I don't know. There's certain scenes that are there because it's just like, okay, you have said yes. You have chosen to step into this world. You're here now. Let's really be in this world. So yeah, I hope you think that there are parts that are funny. There's one conversation in here that I personally think is like the funniest thing that I. So we'll see. We'll see if you guys agree.
Well, I laughed a lot during the first book, so I'm sure that there's a lot of humor in the second. All right, so we are running out of time. My last question for you. Oh, before I ask my last question, I know you have also done a YA novel under a different name. What is the title of that novel? Can you tell us?
Yes, that is My Mechanical Romance, and it's by me, Alexia. Yeah, so people always ask me why I write under one name or the other, and my answer is pretty normal and bleak, which is that because I'm a woman of color, people will assume I'm a YA author. So Olavi Blake only writes for adults, and Alexine, which is my actual name, only writes for young adults. So that's where that line falls.
Well, if anyone would like to get that, you can get it at bookshop.com/shop/busboysbooks to support Busboys. You get it delivered direct from warehouse to your door. So now I have my final question.
That book will make you feel like good about the world. I think
it's a good palate cleanser.
You're supposed to walk away from My Mechanical Romance feeling good, feeling happy, and like there's hope. And that's not necessarily what you walk away from the Atlas 6.
So yeah, just read that after. All right. So my final question is, what do you think your younger self would think of this book if she were to read it?
Let's see. I'm trying to channel my younger self. What does she want? I mean, okay. My younger self loved romance, loved revenge narratives, loved I Capture the Castle. That was my favorite book of my adolescence. Like if I had to pick my favorite books from my teen years, it would be I Capture the Castle, The Count of Monte Cristo. I think I was really into like the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants also. Like I've always really liked stories that have an ensemble cast where you get to like dip into everybody's stories. I'm very nosy. I'm just deeply nosy as a person. And that's how I write. I'm very interested in what is going on with everyone and what did we miss while we were in somebody else's head. Like just for me, I'm the kind of reader who I will skim expository, detailed passages. If I don't care what something looks like whatever, just let me build this in my own head. So that's why you don't find a lot of that in my books. So I think she would at least be pleased with that part. I think she would not skim. So that's very promising. That's yeah, I think that she would certainly, I think she would enjoy the way that I've built the romance, which is that at any given moment, people might kiss.
Yeah, that's very exciting. You never know.
I wrote that one scene, the absence scene, for my former self, because she would read the book and be like, you know what they should do right now? But they wouldn't do it, but I wrote it and they did. So so she'd be like, oh my God, they did.
Because that's the best thing about writing your own stories.
Yeah. So I would like to say I would enjoy this book.
Fantastic. Olavi, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone who is watching, please remember that you can head over to Eventbrite. The Busboys and Poets Eventbrite page will still have this event up until 11 p.m. tonight, and purchase what will be a personalized signed copy for yourself or for someone else. All right, everyone. Oh, and if you're watching this later on and not live, you can still purchase the book through our bookshop. All right. Thank you again, Olivia. I had a fantastic time. I hope everyone watching enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it too.
I did. Thank you so much for having me. Your questions were great. I loved it. Vibes were perfect.
The vibes, past the vibe check.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.